I rode for the Grey Wall expecting the dead. 3 seasons had passed since the Ironville Raiders took the Northern Pass, and 3 seasons was too long. My fastest riders had turned back twice. The mountain road washed out in the first thaw, then buried again before the second, and the recall horn had not sounded once from the outpost. In Thornvest's long history, a silent recall horn meant one thing. It meant there was no one left to blow it. My council had already drafted the memorial register. 23 names in my wolves' careful script: Davin, Oral, Keswick, Fenn, soldiers who had held the Grey Wall post when the Ironville came through the pass like a black river. Good wolves, my wolves. I had read every name twice in the dark of my study, and felt the weight of each one settle into me the way iron settles into ore, cold and permanent. I did not send another rider, I went myself. Rail rode with me and said nothing for the first 2 days, which was how I knew he believed what I believed, that we were riding to count graves and carry ashes home. My wolf ran quiet in my chest, which he does only when he is braced for grief. We climbed the mountain road in the gray light of early thaw, the black pines closing overhead and the snow still deep enough to reach my horse's knees in the drifts, and I let myself think about what I would say to 23 families. I had done it before. I knew the words. They never became easier to carry. On the 4th morning, we came through the last tree line and saw the Grey Wall outpost. The gate was standing. The palisade was standing, repaired. I could see even from a distance, with timber that did not match the original construction, rough cut and lashed in a way that spoke of urgency and limited tools rather than any engineer's hand. The watchtower at the northeast corner had been shored up with a prop of pine trunk at an angle that should not have held but had. Smoke came from the central building. Thin smoke, the smoke of a fire banked low to stretch what little fuel remained, but smoke. The smell of it, pine char and something medicinal, something I could not name from that distance, reached me on the wind. My wolf went absolutely still in my chest. Not the stillness of grief, a different stillness, the stillness before recognition. I said nothing to Rail. I pressed my horse forward through the snow. The gate opened before I reached it. One of my wolves, Keswick, and the sight of him living and upright sent something through my sternum that I had no word for, pulled the latch and stepped back, and behind him stood 4 others, gaunt, their cheeks hollow, their eyes too bright in the way of men who have been cold and hungry for too long and are not quite certain the rescue is real. They were in their furs. They were armed. They were alive. "My lord," Keswick said, and his voice cracked on the second word. I dismounted. I gripped his arm and he gripped mine, and neither of us spoke for a moment, which was sufficient. "How many?" I asked. 23 in, 23 standing, my lord." I stood very still in the gate. 23 in, 23 standing. I had ridden 4 days expecting ashes, and I was looking at the living faces of every wolf I had sent to this post. My throat was tighter than I permitted it to show. "Tell me," I said. Keswick looked past me briefly toward the central building. "She should tell it, she'll tell it better." I followed his eyes. She was standing in the doorway of the main hall, watching me. She had not come out to greet me, which struck me even then. Every soldier at the post had moved toward the gate when I came through, that instinct of bodies toward the command. She had stayed where she was. She was not tall. She was wearing a healer's working apron over a wool dress that had been mended so many times the original cloth was more patched than whole, and her hair was pulled back in the way of someone who does not think about hair, because she is thinking about other things. Her hands, even from this distance, I could see were chapped and scarred in the small particular way of someone who works with instruments and fire and cold water all at once. She was looking at me the way a person looks at something they have been waiting for long enough that they have stopped feeling the waiting. My wolf stirred. Not rose, not surged, stirred, the way a banked coal stirs when the air shifts. Quiet and foundational, as if something in my chest had been waiting too, without my knowledge, and had only now recognized that the wait was over. I crossed the yard toward her. She didn't move. She watched me come with dark eyes that were steady and gave nothing away, and when I was close enough to speak at a normal volume, she said, before I could, "Your eastern wall needs a real carpenter. The timber I used will hold through one more winter, not two." I looked at her. "You're the healer," I said. "I'm the only one here who isn't your soldier," she said. "So yes." Her name, I learned in the next hour, was Myra. She had come to the Greywall outpost 11 months before the Ironville raid, under a commission from the District Healers Guild, a temporary post, a 6-month rotation covering the border settlements. The commission had long since expired. She had stayed because the nearest relief was 3 days' ride and there was no one else. She told me this the way someone reports a supply inventory, directly, without inflection, as though the facts were self-evident and required no ornamentation. She had made tea from dried herbs she grew in a window box inside the hall, because the frost would not let anything grow outside after the first siege, and she had given me a tin cup of it, and given one to Rael, and then sat across the table from me with her own hands wrapped around her cup and answered my questions. "When did the first assault come?" 8 days after your riders stopped making contact. The Ironville came through the high pass. They knew the road was washed out and that there would be no resupply. They took the outer palisade in the first hour. And my wolves held the inner wall. "Your wolves held," she said. "Davin lost 2 fingers on his right hand in the first push. I took them off cleanly. He has full use of the hand. The grip is 90% of what it was. He can draw a bow. Oral had a chest wound that required drainage every second day for 3 weeks. He is healed. Fen had a fever that," she paused, not for emotion, I realized, but for precision, that I was not certain he would come through. He did. She went through them by name. 23 men, their injuries, their recoveries, the treatments she had used, the substitutions she had made when supplies ran out, the things she had rationed and how. She had kept a log. She produced it from her apron pocket. A small bound notebook, the pages dense with her writing, dates and names and dosages and observations running in tight economical lines, because she had been conserving paper as well as everything else. I read several pages. I read them twice. "When did the second assault come?" I said. 6 weeks after the first. They had regrouped at the pass. I had expected them in 4. Something crossed her face, not regret exactly, the look of a person noting a calculation that had been slightly wrong. I used the time to reinforce the gate. It held the second assault. The third, she set down her cup. The third came in the deep of winter. They brought fire. "The northeast tower," I said. "Yes, we lost it in the first hour." I put Oral and Keswick on suppression. They understand fire better than the others. They'd trained for it and held the rest on the gate. The tower burned. The palisade held. She looked at her cup. "That was 3 months ago. They haven't come back. I think they believe we're too costly." I was watching her face while she said all of this. She delivered it without drama, without any bid for recognition, the flat calm of someone who has been through something and processed it and filed it and moved on to the next problem. But beneath the calm, if you looked, the gray hollows under her eyes that spoke of months of insufficient sleep. The way her left hand, when she set down the cup, had a faint tremor she controlled immediately and without acknowledgement. The lines around her mouth that were not age, she was perhaps 30, perhaps a few years more, but the stamp of sustained, relentless effort. She had held 23 of my wolves through 3 sieges, alone, and she was telling me about it as though it were a routine report. My wolf was not quiet anymore. There was a warmth spreading from my sternum outward, the kind of warmth that has nothing to do with the fire and everything to do with what it is finding. And I recognized it distantly, the way you recognize a sound from childhood that you have not heard in many years. I did not say anything about it. I finished my tea. "Where are you sleeping?" I asked. She blinked. It was the first question I realized that had caught her off guard. "The store room," she said. "I gave the bunks to the men who were recovering. The floor is. No, I said. She looked at me. My men will reorganize the sleeping arrangements. You will take a bunk tonight. I stood, starting tonight. She opened her mouth and I could see the argument forming. Practical, reasonable. The same voice that had told me the Eastern Wall would hold one more winter but not two. And I said before she could, "It is not a request." She closed her mouth. After a moment, all right. I went to see my wolves. I spent the rest of that first day moving through the outpost, speaking to each of my men. Hearing Davin flex his right hand and show me the grip. Hearing Oral breathe clean and deep without the wet rattle of chest fluid. Hearing Fen, who had nearly died of the fever and looked it still in the careful fragility of his face, tell me what she had done for him in the 3 weeks when he didn't know if he was coming back. "Sat up with me," he said simply, "every night. When I couldn't remember my own name, she'd say it back to me, kept saying it, kept." He stopped and swallowed. "She didn't sleep those 3 weeks. I know she didn't. I'd drift and come back and she was there." I stood in the bunk room and listened to Fen tell me this, and felt the warmth in my chest become something harder to name. I had been Alpha King of Thornvest for 14 years. I had commanded armies. I had held the passes against the Ironville before this, and I had held them since. I had built the kingdom my father left me into something that would outlast us both. I knew the arithmetic of sacrifice, how much any position costs, what it takes to hold ground under assault, the specific gravity of a decision to stay when leaving is possible. I knew that arithmetic well. I had never seen it executed the way Myra had executed it. Without rank, without obligation, without the pack bond that makes my wolves willing to die for the Alpha King, because the Alpha King is their blood and their world. She had held for no reason except that there were people who needed holding, and she had done it with a notebook and a window box of herbs and a storeroom floor and 3 months of not sleeping, and she had not sent the distress signal because I asked Keswick this, specifically. She said if they heard the horn they might push harder, thinking we were desperate. She wanted them to think we were comfortable. She had used the horn's silence as a weapon. She had been comfortable on a storeroom floor and let the raiders believe it. Rail found me at the watchtower at dusk, looking out at the pass. The light was going red across the snow. "You're not leaving tomorrow," he said. "No." "Good." He stood beside me a moment. Then, "The men are in better shape than I expected. She has been meticulous." "Yes." "She's not guild registered," he said. "The commission expired. Technically, she's been practicing without." "Rail." "Yes, my lord." "Find something else to say." He was quiet for a moment. Then, dryly, "The Eastern Wall needs a real carpenter." I almost smiled. "I know," she told me. We stayed 3 days at the outpost before the mountain road was clear enough to risk the descent for anyone other than my horse and Rails. Those 3 days I watched her work. She had a systematic nature that my wolf found inexplicably restful. The way she moved through the hall in the mornings checking on the men who were still in the last stages of recovery, the precise economy of her hands when she changed a dressing, the way she wrote in her log before she ate anything herself, because the log was information, and information was not optional. She rationed herself the way she had rationed everything else: her time, her rest, her words. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was hoarded, either. She gave what she had and trusted that careful management would mean it lasted. On the second evening, I found her in the storeroom before the sleeping arrangements had fully reorganized. She was on her bedroll on the floor. She had simply lain down where she always lay down and gone, I realized, looking at her, immediately and completely to sleep. The kind of sleep that is less a choice than a collapse, the body surrendering all at once to a debt that has been accumulating for months. I stood in the storeroom doorway for a long moment. Then I looked at her wrist. The mark was there, faint at first, the silver pale of frostbite rather than the bright burn of the bond's full wake, and then, as I watched, it deepened. The mate mark of Thornvest's alpha bloodline. 3 interlocked rings in a pattern that my grandmother's grandmother had called the chain that holds the world, rising on the inside of her left wrist in the slow, certain way of something that has been true for a long time and is only now being allowed to be visible. I looked at my own wrist. Mine had been there since the gate. Since that first moment I walked across the yard and she had said, before I could speak, that my eastern wall needed a real carpenter. I had looked at it in the dark of my first night at the outpost and understood what it meant and felt the full and somewhat alarming weight of that understanding settle into me. The way I had felt the weight of those 23 names, but entirely different. The weight of something that was not loss but its opposite. I had not said anything to her yet. She had been awake and necessary and occupied, and I did not know how to say it in a way that would not sound like the Alpha King claiming a service rendered. She was not a service rendered. She was not a reward. She was a woman who had held my wolves through 3 sieges and a deep winter fire and months of a storeroom floor, not because she loved me. She did not know me, but because it was necessary, and the specific way that she was made had not permitted her to do otherwise. That specificity, that immovable quality, was the most exactly right thing I had ever encountered, and I had known it since the moment she looked at me across the yard, with the eyes of someone who had been waiting long enough to stop feeling the waiting. My wolf knew it too. He had known it at the gate. I went back to my own bunk, and I lay in the dark of the outpost thinking about 23 names that were alive, and about the mark on my wrist, and about what I was going to say in the morning. She woke before I did, which surprised me. I heard the fire being rebuilt in the main hall, the careful, practiced sequence of it, the sound of someone who has done this particular task hundreds of times in the dark before anyone else was awake. And I lay there for a few minutes listening to the outpost come alive around me before I rose and went to the hall. She was at the fire with her back to me. The morning light came through the high window and caught the side of her face and the back of her hands, and there was the mark on her left wrist, the 3 rings fully bright now, fully legible. She hadn't covered it. She might not have seen it yet. "Myra," I said. She turned. She had seen it. Her eyes came up from the mark to my face and held there, steady, giving nothing away, which was exactly what I expected. But there was something under the steadiness, not fear, not calculation, a very quiet, very controlled version of the same thing I had felt at the gate. The recognition of something that had been true and is now being permitted to be said. "I know what it is," she said. "I know you do." I crossed the room. I held out my own wrist. The marks matched hers to mine, mine to hers, the chain that holds the world in its full bright version on both of us. She looked at them for a long moment, then she looked up at me. "You don't owe me anything," she said. "I want that to be clear. What I did here was not an exchange. I wasn't holding your men in order to." "I know," I said. "Then you should also know that I'm not," she stopped, tried again. "I'm not someone who fits easily into." "I know that too," I said. "I'm not asking you to fit. I'm telling you what the mark says, which is what I would have told you at the gate if you hadn't immediately told me about the eastern wall." She was quiet. Then so briefly I might have imagined it, the corner of her mouth moved. "The eastern wall," she said, "really does need a real carpenter." "I'll send one," I said, "after." "After what?" "After I've said what I came to the fire to say." I looked at her. I let the distance between us stay what it was, a respectful distance, her choice to close or not close, and I said, "You held my wolves. You held a pass that should not have held, with no reinforcements and no rank and no obligation, and you held it. I have been Alpha King for 14 years, and I have not seen the equivalent of what you did here, and I came to the fire to tell you that, apart from everything the mark means, and before anything else is decided. What you did will not be unnamed." The something under her steadiness did something complicated. I watched her absorb it, the way she absorbed everything, carefully, precisely, without waste. And I watched the careful control of it, and I watched her decide, very quietly, to allow herself to feel it instead of filing it. "All right," she said. "All right," I said. We stood by the fire in the early morning of the outpost, the mark on both our wrists, the wolves beginning to move in the bunks beyond the hall. Neither of us spoke for a little while. It did not need speech. The warmth in my chest was steady and full in the way of something that has always been there and has finally been acknowledged, and I think, from the way she had stopped holding her shoulders in the particular braced way she had held them since the gate, she felt the same. Fen was the first wolf awake. He came into the hall pulling on his coat, saw us standing at the fire, saw our wrists, and stopped in the doorway with the particular expression of a man doing rapid arithmetic. "My lord," he said carefully. "Good morning, Fen." He looked at Myra, he looked at me. He had been 17 days between life and death, while she sat up with him every night saying his name, and the arithmetic on his face resolved into something simple. He bowed. Not a soldier's bow to a commanding officer. The bow a thorn-vast wolf makes to a Luna, deep, from the waist, the full acknowledgment of rank and worth combined. Myra looked at him as though she were not entirely certain. She was the one being bowed to. "It's you," Fen said, straightening. His voice was still the fragile, careful voice of a man not long out of fever. "Obviously it's you. I should have—" He stopped. "Are you going home? Are you? Please tell me you're not going back to the guild." "The guild has long since stopped expecting me back," she said. Fen exhaled. "Good." He looked at me with an expression that was not quite reproach. He was too disciplined for reproach, but contained the ghost of it. "We've been her pack for 11 months, my lord, with respect." I felt the warmth in my chest shift into something that might, in a man given to it, have been called amusement. "I'm aware, Fen." "Then you understand that there are 22 other men in this outpost who are also going to want to." "Fen." "My lord." "Wake them." He went. In the time it took for 22 wolves to put on their coats and come into the hall, Myra drank her tea and did not say anything more, though I could see her thinking. The something complicated in her face had settled into the something steady, which I was learning was her default, but the steadiness now had a quality that had not been there at the gate or at the table the first night. Opened, slightly. Warmer. The quality of someone who has been held at a careful distance from warmth for a long time and is no longer certain the distance is necessary. They came in one by one, the 22 wolves of the Greywall outpost. They came in and they saw us at the fire and they saw our wrists and they reacted, each of them, in the particular individual way of men who have been through something together and know what it costs. Keswick gripping the doorframe briefly, then standing straight. Davin holding up his right hand, the recovered one, as though making an offering. Oral simply standing and looking at her with wet eyes and then looking away and blinking it off because he was Oral and Oral did not weep, not technically. The rest, one by one, doing what Fen had done. The bow. The full thorn-vast bow. The Luna's acknowledgement. She bore it with the same economy she brought to everything. She did not tell them to stop. She did not dismiss it with a wave of her hand, which I had half expected, the instinct of the person who deflects recognition. She received it. Carefully, precisely, as though she understood that it was not about her alone, that the bow was also what they needed to give, after 11 months, the weight of which they had carried and she had carried with them. When the last wolf was in the hall, I spoke. "Her name is Myra," I said. "She held this post when no one else could have held it. She is the reason every one of you is standing in this room." I let that settle. Then, "She is also the Alpha King's mate. The bond mark is present and acknowledged, hers and mine both, and I am naming it publicly before every wolf in this hall here before we return to Thornvast." The hall was very quiet. "The formal ceremony will be held in Thornvast," I said. "But Thornvast will not be her first pack. You are her first pack." She earned you and you know it. I want you to know that I know it too. Keswick said, voice rough. She's staying. She's staying, I said. And Myra, quietly, without flourish, from her place at my side. I told him the eastern wall needs a real carpenter. He's sending one. A sound went through the hall. Not quite laughter, something looser than laughter. The sound of men who have been gripping something for 11 months and are only now putting it down. We left the Greywall outpost 4 days later, when the road was clear enough for a full group to travel. Myra walked out the gate carrying a pack that was, as far as I could tell, not substantially larger than what she'd arrived with 11 months before. Her kit, her notebook, the remainder of her herbs. She had given the window box to Oral, who had looked at it for a moment, and then taken it without a word in the manner of a man who understands that some gifts are not symbolic but operational. I had offered her a horse. She could ride, she'd said. She'd learned it for the commission, but she would prefer, given the state of the road, to walk beside the horse rather than on it, where she could see the footing. I had dismounted. We walked the first mile of the mountain road in the cold, clear air of early spring, the black pines on both sides beginning to show their first faint green at the tips, and my wolf was as settled in my chest as he had ever been in 14 years. "What is Thornvest like?" she said. "In spring, cold still. The thaw comes late. We are further north than most of the kingdoms." "Is there a good infirmary?" "There is now," I said. "There will be whatever you need it to be." She nodded, considering this the way she considered everything, as a practical matter to be assessed and acted on. Then, "Will your council make difficulty about the mark?" "My council will do what it always does," I said. "It will have opinions, and then it will accommodate the facts." "I'm not guild registered," she said. "The commission." "The guild," I said, "is welcome to discuss the matter with me directly." She looked at me sideways. There was the thing at the corner of her mouth again. "You're very certain," she said. "I have been Alpha King for 14 years, I said. "I have learned that certainty is a more efficient use of time than uncertainty." "I've found the same," she said, and then, after a pause, dry and precise as everything she said, "I was uncertain for the first 6 weeks about whether they were coming back. After that I was certain they weren't, and it was easier. I thought about what it had cost to reach that certainty, what it had looked like, alone in the outpost, to stop expecting rescue and simply commit to enduring without it. I thought about the storeroom floor and the window box herbs, and the horn she'd kept silent for 3 months, using it as a weapon from a position of radical disadvantage. "Myra," I said. "Yes." "What made you stay when the commission ended?" She walked a few steps without answering. The snow crunched under our feet, and the horses moved steady behind us, and the pines let the wind through with a sound like held breath. "I came to stay for 6 months," she said at last. "At the end of 6 months there were people who needed a healer, and I was a healer, and there was no one else. The calculation was simple." She paused. "It stayed simple. Right up until the Ironville came, it was just a simple calculation. After that it was a different kind of simple." I looked at her. "The different kind," I said, "where there is no good option and you choose the least bad one and then execute it as well as you can." "Yes," she glanced up at me briefly. "You know it." "I know it," I said. "I have known it on the field. I have not known it for 11 months alone." "You get used to the alone part," she said. "It is the not knowing that costs you. The hours when you can't calculate because you don't have the data, those are the expensive ones." I thought of the hours she'd spent beside Fenn's bunk, saying his name back to him in the dark so he would not lose it. Hours when no amount of calculation could tell her whether he was coming back, and she had stayed anyway, burning through the most expensive fuel there is, the hours when you cannot know if it's working, because the alternative was unconscionable. "How did you manage the not knowing?" I said. She considered this. "I kept the logs," she said. "Everything I did, everything I could see, everything I could measure." Not because it changed anything, I knew it didn't change anything, but it gave me something to put my hands on when the data wasn't there. A record, evidence that I had been present and acting even when the outcome was unknown. She paused. And I said names, she said more quietly. In the dark, I would go through the roster, Davin, Oral, Keswick, Fenn, every name, every night. It kept them as individuals. It kept me from thinking of them in aggregate, which is, when you're very tired, there is a danger of that, of abstraction. I didn't allow it. I walked beside her on the mountain road and listened to this, and felt the warmth in my chest spread outward into something that I would have been unable to explain to my counsel, and did not attempt to. 23 names, said every night in the dark. A healer with no obligation and no rank and no bond mark yet visible, keeping 23 men individual against the gravity of abstraction and exhaustion, because she had decided they would remain specific. Because they were hers. Whether the bond mark had appeared yet or not, she had decided they were hers, and she had acted from that decision without deviation. My wolf settled deeper, which I had not thought possible. You should know, I said, that Fenn considers himself your wolf. I know, she said. Oral also. I know that too. Keswick has been more restrained, but he's the most reserved of them, and the fact that he bowed is. I know, she said again quietly. I know all 23 of them. 11 months. There was something in her voice that was not quite emotion. She did not traffic in emotion for its own sake, but the specific gravity of truth being acknowledged. They're good men. They held the gate when it could have broken. They didn't break. Neither did you, I said. She didn't say anything to that, but the set of her shoulders changed very slightly. The last of the braced quality, the last of the distance. We walked the second mile in the kind of quiet that does not need filling. The descent took the full day. We stopped at the snowline for the night, where the road widened enough for the camp rail, and the others assembled with the efficiency of men who have done it many times. Myra settled into the camp's rhythm without being told how it worked, another quality of hers, that adaptation, the rapid understanding of new systems and the adjustment to them without friction. She sat by the fire with Fenn on one side and Keswick on the other and answered their questions about Thornvest, which she had never seen, asking them for information she could assess and plan from. What were the infirmary's current stores? Who was the head physician and what was their methodology? How many wolves were in garrison at any given time, and what were the most common injuries from the mountain patrols? Rail appeared at my side, watching her. The council, he said. Not tonight, Rail. They will have questions. About the mark, about the guild commission, about the registration. The council, I said, will see the mark and the 23 men she brought home, and they will do the arithmetic, and the arithmetic will give them the same answer it gave me. Rail was quiet for a moment, and if it doesn't, then they are worse at mathematics than I thought, and I will explain it to them. With patience. With the patience appropriate to the situation. Rail looked at the fire, at Myra, who was asking Keswick about the garrison's injury rate with the focused attention of someone already planning solutions to problems she had not yet been formally assigned. She is very, he paused, choosing the word. Yes, I said. You knew at the gate. I knew before the gate. At the tree line, when the smoke was still just smoke, and I could see the palisade was standing. You didn't say anything. No, I watched her. She had moved from injury rates to the question of what medicinal herbs could be grown under the conditions of Thornvast's climate and growing season, and Fenn, who had done time in the capital's kitchen gardens before his posting, was telling her earnestly what he remembered. There was nothing to say yet. I needed to understand what had happened here before I said anything. And now I understand it. I looked at my wrist. The 3 rings, bright and unhurried. Everything I know how to value is present in her in a form I have not previously encountered, Rail. The arithmetic is not complicated. Rael considered this. The guild will send a letter. Let them. The northern lords will want an introduction at the spring council. They'll have one. She'll need a good infirmary, a real carpenter for the eastern wall, and to be left alone to work. Everything else she will manage. She has demonstrated, I said, a capacity for management under difficult conditions. Rael made a sound that was not quite a laugh. My lord. He moved off toward his own bedroll, and I stayed by the fire's edge until the camp settled, watching the stars come out over the mountain, clean and cold and very far. Thornvest in spring is gray stone and iron blue sky, and the river that comes down from the North Pass running fast and opaque with snowmelt. The great hall was hung with Thornvest's winter colors still, charcoal and silver, the color of the sky before the real thaw. When I brought my wolves home and walked through the gate of the keep with Myra at my side and 23 living wolves behind us. The yard was full. Word travels faster than horses in a keep. Someone had ridden ahead, which was Rael's doing, and the yard held the garrison, the council, the household staff, and the particular collection of people who gather when the Alpha King returns from a journey that was supposed to be grim, and has not visibly been grim. There were expressions of various kinds, relief at the sight of 23 men thought dead. Assessment, from the council members I could see at the back of the yard, that was the particular careful assessment of people trying to understand what they were looking at. And from the garrison wolves, a simpler, more immediate thing. Recognition. They could see the mark, both marks. Mine had been visible on the road and I had not covered it. Myra walked through the yard without looking for reaction. She looked at the keep the way she had looked at the outpost on the morning she showed me the log, taking inventory, noting what she was working with. Her eyes went to the infirmary building at the east side of the yard. She'd asked about the layout on the road, and then to the gate timbers, and then to the sky, checking the weather. She was in Thornvest for perhaps 40 seconds before she was already planning how to be useful in it. My wolf did something that had no practical equivalent. The council found me before I had crossed the yard. Hailed, who was the oldest and most direct, stepped up with the expression of a man deciding that ceremony will cost more time than just asking. My lord, he said, the mark. The mark, I confirmed. Is the lady, he looked at Myra, who had arrived at the infirmary building and was looking at its exterior with the expression of someone finding, as expected, both assets and deficiencies. Is the lady the healer from the Greywall post? She is the healer who held the Greywall post through 3 Ironville sieges and brought 23 wolves through the winter alive, I said. Yes. Hailed looked at the 23 wolves, looked at Myra, looked at my wrist. The guild commission, he said. Expired, I said. Yes, she stayed anyway. Another long look at the 23 men who were, at this moment, doing the specific thing that men do when they have been somewhere terrible and have come home. Standing in the keep yard looking at ordinary things, a stable door, a fair bucket, a cat on a wall, with the private expression of recognizing the ordinary as what it is. I see, Hailed said. Good, I said. Tell the others. I crossed the yard to where Myra was standing. The infirmary, she said when I reached her. The roof drains incorrectly. In a heavy rain, the northeast corner will take water. I'll get someone to look at it. The same carpenter coming to the eastern wall at the Greywall post. A different carpenter, a better one. The Greywall post has sentimental value. Thornvest's infirmary has operational value. She looked at me. That is a reasonable distinction. I have my moments, I said. The corner of her mouth did what it did. I had, in the time on the road, learned to read it. The precise economy of a woman who does not give amusement freely, and therefore the giving of it is exact and certain. It was becoming the clearest signal I had for what was happening under the steady surface of her. Come inside, I said. I'll introduce you to the council. They'll want to understand what happened at the post, and you'll tell it better than I will." "I'll tell it accurately," she said. "Whether that is better depends on what they're looking for." "They're looking for the truth," I said. "They'll get it from you." She thought about this for a moment. "All right." We went inside. The formal ceremony, when it came, was 3 weeks later, on the first day of genuine spring. The day the Thornvast River turned from snowmelt gray to its summer color, a dark clear blue that meant the passes were fully open and the season had turned. I had wanted to do it sooner. Myra had wanted to wait until she understood the keep well enough to stand in front of the pack without the particular vulnerability of the stranger, which I had respected because it was exactly the kind of thing she would need and exactly the kind of thing she would know. In 3 weeks she had reorganized the infirmary, identified 3 members of the garrison with field medicine capability who had never been formally trained and initiated their training, established a medicinal herb garden on the south wall where the growing conditions were best, and written a 16-page assessment of the keep's medical readiness that Hale had read twice, and then brought to council meeting with the expression of a man holding something he had not expected. She had learned the name of every wolf in the garrison. She had, on the 4th day, appeared in the practice yard with a question about how the Northern Patrol wolves were managing cold weather wounds, and by the end of the hour she was walking the yard with the patrol captain, who was Daven's older brother, discussing wound management at temperature in the specific practical register they both lived in. Fenn followed her everywhere. This was not, strictly speaking, a formal arrangement. It was simply a fact that had established itself. Fenn was on his feet again, his fever fully behind him, his energy careful but building, and his primary occupation when not on assigned duty appeared to be Myra's proximity. She tolerated this with the particular expression she reserved for things she found unnecessary, but did not judge worth contesting. On the day before the ceremony, I found her in the infirmary at the end of the day, writing in the log. She had started a new notebook. The old one from the outpost was shelved above her desk, its cover dark with handling. She wrote in the new one with the same dense economical lines, the same dates and names and observations, and I stood in the doorway for a moment before she looked up. "Tomorrow," she said. "Tomorrow," I said. "You'll need to tell me what the ceremony requires. I don't want to do it incorrectly because I didn't have the information." "It's simple," I said. "We stand before the pack. The mark is shown, both marks, both wrists. I speak your name, you speak mine. The pack acknowledges the bond. And then you're Luna." She considered this. "The formal designation changes what I can authorize in the infirmary," she said. I looked at her. "For example," she said, without looking up from the log, "the current arrangement requires me to route supply requests through the garrison quartermaster, which adds 2 days to any order. If I have the formal designation, I can authorize directly." "You're thinking about the supply chain." "I'm thinking about the supply chain," she confirmed. "Is that," she looked up briefly, "is that a strange thing to be thinking about?" "It is the most exactly you thing," I said, "that you could be thinking about." She held my eyes for a moment. Then the corner of her mouth. "I'll be ready," she said. She was. The great hall the next morning was full. The full garrison, the household, the council, the domestic wolves of the keep. And through some communication I had not made explicitly but which had been made nonetheless, the 23 wolves of the Greywall post standing in a line to the left of the dais, Fenn at their center, all of them in their best coats, all of them with the particular quality of men who know they are witnessing something they will tell for the rest of their lives. Myra walked in from the side door, not the main entrance. She was in Thornvast silver and charcoal. Someone had arranged this. I did not ask who. I suspected Fenn's involvement, and her hair was down, which was the only time I had seen it down, and she looked like herself, which was the most important thing. She had not been dressed into something else. She looked like the woman at the gate, the woman at the fire, the woman at the long table going through 23 names in a notebook. She walked to the dais with her hands quiet at her sides and her face with its steady quality, and she looked at me, and I looked at her, and for a moment neither of us spoke. I turned to the pack. "Her name is Myra," I said. "She held the Greywall post through 3 Ironville sieges. She kept 23 of our wolves alive through a winter when no one could reach them. She did this alone, with no obligation, no rank, no reinforcement." I paused. "The mark appeared when I rode through the Greywall gate. I have known what it meant since the moment I knew the wolves were alive and saw who was standing at that gate." I looked at her. "She is the Alpha King's mate. She is Thornvast's Luna. This is spoken publicly before this pack, before the wolves who are alive because of her. There is no condition and there is nothing owed in return. It is true, and I am naming it." The hall was very quiet. I held out my wrist, she held out hers. The marks matched as they always had, the 3 interlocked rings, the chain that holds the world, and the hall's quiet deepened into the particular quality of an acknowledgement that has been received rather than merely heard. Then Fenn said, in a voice that was perhaps louder than he intended, "There she is." It was not the formal words. The formal words were mine to speak, and I had spoken them. But Fenn's 3 words went through the hall in the way that true things go, without ceremony, without structure, simply landing. Several voices picked it up. "There she is." And then the Greywall wolves were moving, not formally, not in drill formation, but the way men move when they have decided something, converging on the dais from the left, Keswick and Davin and Oral, and the rest of them, forming a ring around us, around her, the 23 wolves she had held through the winter forming the innermost circle of the pack acknowledgement. Myra looked at them. She looked at each of them in the particular precise way of a woman who knows names, all 23 names, said every night in the dark, and the careful steadiness of her face did what it had been doing more frequently since the mountain road, since the fire in the early morning of the outpost. It opened. Slightly. Precisely. The exact amount she would permit. She reached out and took Fenn's arm. A healer's grip, 2 fingers on the inside of the wrist. The pulse check she had been doing for 11 months. The same gesture that had told her every morning whether he was still in the world. He looked down at her hand and then up at her and did not say anything, which was the most Fenn could give without losing the professional composure he was protecting fiercely. "I know," she said quietly. He nodded. The rest of the pack, the garrison wolves, the household, the council, had begun the formal acknowledgement, the bow moving through the hall in the slow wave that is not ordered but spreads because it is true, because the pack understands what it is looking at. 23 living witnesses, the mark on 2 wrists. The woman who had decided, alone in a storeroom on a floor, that a simple calculation remained simple for as long as there were people who needed it to remain simple. I stood at the center of it and felt the warmth in my chest that had been there since the gate, steady, foundational, as unhurried as the mark on my wrist. And I looked at Myra, who was receiving the bow of a full pack with the same economy she brought to everything. Without deflection, without dismissal, with the specific attentive care of a person who understands that what is being offered is not for her alone. Later, when the hall had opened into the informal gathering that follows ceremony in Thornvast, fire and food, and the particular loosening of formality that a pack needs after a formal moment, I found her standing at the south window, her tea in her hands, looking out at the keep yard. "The herb garden will need a windbreak on the north side," she said, when I came to stand beside her. "I'll find a gardener," I said. "I want to plan it myself. I just need someone to build what I design." "Then tell me what you need." She looked at the yard for a moment. The Greywall wolves were down there, Fenn in the center of a group of garrison wolves who were, from their expressions, hearing some account of the siege in the form that soldiers tell things to other soldiers, stripped of everything but the operational facts and the dark comedy of extreme conditions. Myra watched them with the expression she had reserved, on the mountain road, for the black pines showing green at their tips, the acknowledgement of something beginning. "A long list," she said. "Start it tonight," I said. "I'll read it in the morning." She looked up at me, the steady quality. The opened quality that had been steadily replacing it, like spring replacing the last of the mountain snow. Unhurried, certain, the kind of change that does not announce itself but simply becomes undeniable. "All right," she said. She turned back to the yard. Below us, Fenn was demonstrating something, some moment of the third siege, from the angle of his hands, and the garrison wolves were listening with the absorbed attention of men who understand that what they are hearing is the rare and reliable kind of story. The kind where every fact is exactly what it appears to be, spoken by someone who was there, and saw it clearly, and has no reason to embellish. The kind of story that is worth passing on. Myra watched them, her tea cooling in her hands, and said nothing more, and I stood beside her in the quiet of a spring evening in Thornvest, and felt the warmth in my chest in its permanent settled form. The form it had arrived in at the gate and had not shifted from since, and thought about 23 names said in the dark, one by one, so that no one became abstract. She had held them specific, all winter long, by the act of saying them. Now the pack would hold her name the same way. Every wolf in the great hall below us had heard it from my mouth, in the full public voice of the Alpha King before the full pack of Thornvest. She would never be unnamed in this kingdom. I had promised her that at the fire, on the morning of the outpost, before anything was decided. I had said, "What you did will not be unnamed." I keep my word. She knows that now, in the way that she knows everything precisely, through evidence, through the accumulation of observed fact. She has watched me for 3 weeks in this keep, and she has understood what I am and how I operate, the same way I watched her for 3 days at the outpost and understood what she is. We are, both of us, people who deal in the accurate record. The record tonight is simple. Thornvest has a Luna. The Greywall post has its carpenter coming in the morning. The infirmary has its supply chain. 23 wolves are in the yard below us, alive and eating and telling the story to whoever will stand still long enough to hear it. And the woman standing beside me at the window is the reason every one of those facts is a fact. My wolf is settled in the deep and permanent way, the way of a thing finally in its right place. The log is current. The mark is present and acknowledged on both our wrists. That is sufficient.